These are some of my predictions for Saturn in Pisces. Saturn is the planet that rules physical Earth. It rules structure and stability, and that includes infrastructure. Whereas Pisces is the sign that rules the ocean. It rules liquefaction and dissolving things into a giant soup. So Pisces, Saturn can talk about liquefaction or distortion of physical infrastructure, and we might see collapse of major bridges or just really significant erosion of the infrastructure over the next couple of years. Pisces also rules drug and alcohol consumption, especially overconsumption, since it's ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter rules overflow and abundance. Saturn is the planet that rules toxic cycles, the things that we are bound to, as well as breaking out of those toxic cycles through mental reconditioning, programming yourself with reward systems, and so on and so forth. I think for Saturn and Pisces, we're going to see an overabundance in alcohol and drug consumption, as well as a response in the form of increased AA and rehab programs. Think of like the grunge heroin chic vibe of the 90s. That's Saturn and Pisces, and it's coming back for the next 3 years. Next is a focus on the pharmaceutical industry specifically. So Pisces rules drugs and alcohol. That includes pharmaceutical drugs. Saturn is the planet that rules the law, restrictions, and regulations. So Saturn and Pisces is themes of restrictions on drugs and pharmaceuticals. This was the transit where we saw the peak of the war on drugs back in the 90s. We may even possibly see some sort of reparations for people who were affected by the war on drugs the last time Saturn was in Pisces. Although I do think it's more likely to happen on the state level than the federal level necessarily. But we've already seen a restriction on the pharmaceutical industry. On March 16th, only 9 days into Saturn in Pisces, the largest provider of ketamine infusions for mental health treatment has shut down. I think we're going to see a lot of adjustments in the landscape as it relates to synthetic drug treatments. Continuing with the topic of pharmaceuticals, I think we also might see a significant increase in the fentanyl overdoses that we've, witnessed over the past couple of years. We might even possibly see some exposure of the CIA's involvement in the intentional distribution of said fentanyl, but who knows? We're also going to see a major integration of the advanced technologies related to submersible experiences. Pisces is the sign that rules optical illusions and submerging yourself fully within those illusions to create this false reality, whereas Saturn rules advanced technologies, internet networks, and so we're really going to see the integration of these advanced technologies like VR and hologram projections integrated into the mainstream. And we've definitely already seen a taste of this technology unfolding, the airport signs that are holograms and all that stuff. But I really think over the next couple of years, it's going to become expected as a part of the experience. Another thing that's important to mention here is Pisces is a sign that's very much about the collective. It's the collective emotions, the collective subconscious. It's everything all put together. Whereas Aquarius does deal with collective consciousness, the consciousness that allows for innovation and new ideas to be birthed, but it also deals with solitude, isolation, and individuality, being ruled by Saturn in traditional astrology. So as Saturn was moving through Aquarius the past couple years, we've seen Mark Zuckerberg trying to claim ownership of the metaverse for himself, like a dictator. And what we're going to see is a decentralized metaverse become the popular option as Saturn moves into Pisces. And that energy of Saturn, of the advanced technologies, becomes decentralized and dissolved into the collective soup that is Pisces, instead of the individualized wealth that is owned within Aquarius. And of course, Pluto entering Aquarius, like right around the same time, is going to help with the breakdown and the destruction of that centralized metaverse that he's created. And we watched Mark Zuckerberg attempt to use Pluto entering Aquarius to kill his competition of TikTok, and he ended up just committing social network. So probably the most important prediction for Saturn and Pisces has to do with humanity's involvement in the quantum realm, right? Saturn rules advanced technology. Saturn also rules probability. It rules time and timelines, the separation of all of eternity into individual moments of time, as well as branches of different parallel timelines that are all happening simultaneously. So Saturn ruling physical matter and our physical bodies represents the limitations or restrictions that our physical body creates within space and time. We cannot jump outside of space and time because we are trapped inside of our physical body. That's Saturn. Pisces is the sign that rules expansion beyond the limitations of space and time. It goes beyond the limitations of Saturn, which ended Aquarius, and it is everything past that. The unseen realm, the spiritual realm, the quantum realm of infinite possibility. The interconnection of all living things that is described as like the spiritual oneness of Pisces is known in the scientific realm as quantum entanglement. So the last time Saturn was in Pisces was the 90s. That was when we saw a really huge development of the internet, especially the global internet networks under the ocean. Now in 2023, technology is advancing so quickly. I think in the next 3 years, we're going to see quantum supercomputing completely transform our reality. They've been developing quantum supercomputers for many years now, and they've been working on making them more accessible and integrating them into everyday business practice. The way a regular computer has to either read a 0 or a 1, the binary code, the simplest way to explain what's happening with a quantum supercomputer is that they figured out a way to keep Pandora's box closed with respect to the code. So in traditional computers, it's either a 0 or 1. In a quantum computer, it could be either, depending on what calculation the computer is running through it. And that either or allows the computer to run multiple calculations at the same time using the same computing power without having to dedicate an entire separate like channel of computing power. It is Pandora's computer. So things that took months or years to run calculations are going to be done in seconds and minutes. And I'm going to predict that IBM makes a major comeback within the next 3 years because they have been spending a lot of their focus on quantum computing, and I think it's going to pay off for them. We're also going to see a lot of conversation about scientific experiments that kind of push the laws of physics in order to experiment about the nature of our reality. CERN is the main one that comes to mind. I think we'll also see an increased conversation around subliminal messaging. We already saw examples of it with Contagion playing out with the COVID-19 crisis. We saw White Noise, a movie about a chemical spill in Ohio from a train derailment that then came true 6 months later. And so I think the kind of fringe conspiracy theory that there are people who intentionally create this content to like lay the subconscious groundwork and foundation for these disasters to happen is pushing it. But I will say that the general art imitates life, life imitates art thing is definitely going to be a topic of conversation. I wouldn't be surprised if we see mainstream publications like Cosmopolitan or like Variety or whoever talking about things like predictive programming and the impact that subliminal messaging has on the way reality happens. And of course, there's always two sides to every coin. So there are going to be people that are more aware of the power of the subconscious to create reality. And then there's going to be other people that are just subject to more subliminal messaging and are not aware of it. But for the people who do gain an increased awareness of the power of the subconscious and subliminal mind control, I think we might see an increase in the interest in things like hypnotherapy and subconscious therapy. And I think the increase in drug and alcohol use and subsequent rehabilitation that I discussed in the very beginning might come in part with things like hypnotherapy as a method of releasing yourself from drug and alcohol abuse. Again, focusing on Saturn as the ruler of advanced sciences and technological and scientific advancement through research and development, especially in the field of psychology or anything to deal with the mind. Pisces is the sign that rules things disappearing, going behind a veil of forgetfulness. And so when I think of psychological disorders that deal with not seeing things clearly, not being able to recall memories, something like Alzheimer's or dementia, even something like colorblindness. There's like a veil that's preventing you from seeing in full color. There's a filter. So a more positive But hopeful interpretation of Saturn's transiting Pisces could be that there's finally this like focus and clarity brought to this blurry, foggy image or filtered. I talked a little bit about the war on drugs and how we're going to see the landscape of pharmaceuticals change over the next 3 years with changes in government regulations and things like that. But this also includes the introduction of new synthetic medications. Jupiter is the planet that rules synthesis. Ruling Sagittarius, it's the synthesis of a man and a horse to make a centaur, whereas Pisces is a much more complicated synthesis. The chemical process of synthetic drug manufacturing falls into Pisces, whereas Saturn is the planet that rules productivity within capitalist systems, production value, and final product and completion. Saturn and Uranus are the energy of coming up with a new idea, then testing it out and seeing what you can do to improve it. And you continue that process. That's the research and development process. Whereas the final product is really that diamonds that you get at the end. Quite literally, the crystal that is the final product at the end of the crystallization process. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when things like the nationwide ketamine infusion provider closing down, people are going to have to resort to alternative methods of synthetic treatment. And that is where these newly developed synthetic drugs are going to kind of come out and be like, we have just the thing. While we're on the topic of synthetics, because Pisces rules all synthetics, not just synthetic drugs, but synthetic anything, synthetic clothing materials, synthetic building materials. And so that's a huge one that we're going to see too. As we witness kind of the deterioration and erosion of a lot of infrastructure over the next 3 years, we're also going to see the introduction of new alternative building materials, synthetic materials that, are stronger, more durable, more environmentally friendly, blah, 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 blah. We are also going to see some sort of notable change regarding plastic manufacturing. These synthetic oil-based plastics that are currently polluting our fucking oceans needs to change. So I'm definitely predicting some drastic change to governmental regulation on plastic within the next 3 years. So this could go either way. We could either see an increase in regulation and a movement towards more biodegradable alternatives like hemp and cornstarch plastics, or the complete opposite happens and they just abandon all regulations and it becomes an oil-based plastic fucking free-for-all. Regardless of what happens with plastic specifically, the theme around water pollution and water accessibility is going to be a major conversation. Activism and organization, which is ruled by Saturn, specifically related to water accessibility. This is probably going to be the most difficult part of the transit, if I'm being honest. I think Saturn's run through Pisces through 2026 might also bring us both the integration and reconstruction of new and existing socialist government programs. Pisces is the sign that rules empathy, caring for your fellow human being, whereas Saturn rules government mandate. So Saturn in Pisces is government mandated empathy, basically socialist program. Saturn in Pisces was the transit that happened at the end of the New Deal, back after the Great Depression, which is when a lot of the socialist programs in America were formed. That includes things like Social Security, the FHA, federal housing. That also includes the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, which regulates Wall Street trading and other stocks and bonds.